Welcome to Pit Stops. In this episode, one of the most romantic names in motorsport, Lotus. The story of Lotus is the story of one man, Colin Chapman. Chapman's influence on the world of motorsport was immense. His talents extended to engineer, designer, entrepreneur, and above all, enthusiast. The name Lotus would have stayed as a garage operation had it not been for Colin Chapman's determination to steer the company from a North London backyard to World Championship success. The people associated with Lotus read like a who's who of the track. Cliff Allison and Innes Ireland, Stirling Moss, Graham Hill and Jim Clark. Anthony Colin Bruce Chapman was born in Richmond in Surrey on the 19th of May 1928. He attended the Stationers' Company School in Hornsey, where he decided on a career in engineering. In 1948, Chapman graduated as a civil engineer and for recreation competed in car trials using vehicles similar to those used at the time in club racing. While at university, Colin had learnt to fly and then he joined the Royal Air Force on a short-term commission. This experience was to influence the rest of his life, owning his own plane and basing his designs on aircraft construction principles. 1956 saw the introduction of arguably Chapman's most successful sports racing car, the Lotus 11. Designed as a replacement for the Mark IX, it featured a space-frame chassis with independent front suspension and an optional De Dion rear axle covered by an aerodynamic body. The 11 would take a variety of engines, from the 1100 and 1500 Coventry Climax, and even one from Maserati. Over 200 were made, and the model was to prove one of the most successful sports cars ever built. What about Grand Prix racing? At Monaco in 1959, Lotus began to use the new 2.5-litre engines, but the extra power and torque caused problems with the gearbox. Lotus entered Graham Hill and American Pete Lovely in Lotus 16s, who both started from the back of the grid, and as expected, the 16 proved to be unreliable. In 1960, Chapman switched to rear-engined cars with the Lotus 18. By then, the company had expanded to such an extent that it had to move to new premises. 1960 also saw the first Lotus victory at Monaco when Stirling Moss beat the dominant Ferrari team in his Rob Walker Lotus. The first Team Lotus victory was in 1961, when Innes Ireland won the United States Grand Prix. His reward was to be sacked and replaced with Jim Clark. The Scot went on to win the 1963 and 65 World Championships and the Indianapolis 500 in 1965. Colin Chapman introduced the monocoque Lotus 25 and in 1967 the Lotus 49 with Ford's DFV engine. Jim Clark died in 1968 and Graham Hill, who had returned in 1967, won the World Championship. Jochen Rindt won the 1970 title but lost his life in the process. Emerson Fittipaldi won it in 1972. The final World Championship was with another Chapman-led revolution, ground effect. Mario Andretti led home Ronnie Peterson in 1978. On the sports car side, Lotus became a major manufacturer, pioneering fiberglass construction. From the Lotus Elite, followed by the Elan, the Europa, and into the 70s with the Eclat, Excel, and the long-running Esprit. Lotus ownership has transferred through many hands over the years and is currently controlled by Malaysia's Proton company. A new aluminium-bodied Esprit V8 supercar, the first car to use Lotus's unique variable vehicle architecture, will be launched in 2008. It revives the popular Esprit nameplate and is expected to cost around $100,000. Colin Chapman died in December 1982. The Grand Prix team soldiered on, taking its last win with Ayrton Senna in 1987 at Detroit, before closing down for good in 1994. While the Grand Prix team has gone, the Lotus name continues with sporty road cars.
It all started from very humble beginnings in the 50s, when my father borrowed 50 quid off my mother and converted an Austin 7 to go racing. And that really was the foundation of something which became truly memorable.
Colin was a genius that expected so much of others, and if he felt that that you could give what he needed, he would have such incredible support.
He saw something in me that I didn't see myself, and that is, you know, whatever lengths one had to go to try and succeed, and I would do that willingly, and I didn't really know how to say no.
I always felt that he would be probably the toughest man to deal with and the easiest at the same time. If you were riding the crest with him, you had probably the best chance to become a world champion.
If anyone is Mr. Motor Racing or Mr. Formula One, it's got to be Chapman.
As an inventive, conceptual engineer, he was absolutely brilliant. He wasn't that good and wasn't really bothered with the trivia of detailed design.
I think because he was never satisfied with just improving an existing design, and he had a mind which was capable not necessarily of thinking of original inventions, but seeing other people's ideas perhaps in different areas, aeroplanes or boats or what have you, and thinking, oh, well, hang on, I can actually apply this to the racing car. And that led to terrific progress in terms of materials, aerodynamics, sponsorship was another example. It wasn't just his input and his ideas, it was people who he'd worked with at Team Lotus for many, many years in the design studio, who also came up with ideas. He kind of took the credit for them, but mainly because the media, I think, gave him the credit, and he wasn't necessarily going to contradict them.
He was a great actor. He could get very angry with you, but very often it was an act. In fact, he fired me a couple of times while I was at Lotus, and the first time he actually threw his hat on the ground and jumped up and down on it. And then I explained to him that the basis on which he'd fired me was wrong, so he picked up his hat and said, oh, OK, put it back on his head again, and we were, back to normal again. Peter Wright, who now is a leading light in the FIA, was someone who Dad worked very well with. And the magic for me as a development engineer was he was somebody you could go to, you could sit down, talk about an idea, he would ask very critical questions. If you survived that, and he thought it was the right thing to do, he'd say, right, go. Yeah, when they got together, it was this winning objective, that was all they were concerned about, and hence the ground effects idea came along, which really did dominate Formula One for a number of years.
The evolution of ground effects was really beginning to take off in '79 nicely. I mean, on the Lotus 79, which is in '78. That became, yeah, my favorite car for sure, as I said, because it was right. It was just right against the competition.
Into the Lotus 79, Peterson and Andretti took pole at nearly every race. Nothing could touch them, and Mario Andretti went on to win the 1978 World Championship for Lotus.
The greatest feeling you could have, to know that you have a car that is so capable. It just gives you all of the confidence, and it's one of the few times in your career that you can say on this particular day, today they got to beat me.
Winning needed commitment from not just the drivers, but the whole team. It also required a very thick skin if you worked for Colin Chapman.
I had more special moments with Chapman. Explosive, enjoyable, great fun, and absolutely dire than I could possibly relate.
Chapman was my hero when I was a kid, and, but I was always racing against him. And, he used to offer me a job just on an annual basis. I think it was a love-hate thing, with Chapman and myself.
And there was this very strange thing about the whole of that era in Formula One, which was If it won, it was a Ford. If it blew up, it was a Cosworth. And I had the same sort of thing with Chapman. If it won, it was Chapman, and if it lost, it was my fault.
So we obviously want to run Ronnie in that with the new wing bits and all the rest of it. Yeah. And Emerson will just leave him exactly as he is. Or do you want him to do a full tank run then?
No, don't run him. I don't want to run Ronnie either, do we?
I don't, but you know, I was just anticipating being talked into.
No, they shan't have bloody him again. No, definitely not.
There are many, many stories you've heard and read about, and they're all true. I guarantee they're all true.
Landing at Brands Hatch for the Grand Prix in a twin-prop 10-seater plane into a grass strip, which was a campsite. They used to kind of move the tents away to make a little landing strip for him, and he used to burst through the hedge and plonk this thing down in a strip that was about half the length that was recommended in the owner's manual. And the year that they cancelled planes going into Brands Hatch, mainly because of his previous landing from the year before, there's one or two people saying they'd cancelled the most exciting part of the Grand Prix, which was Dad coming into land.
It was so difficult that life, it was, I mean, it was like a 24-hour job, and he would never say thank you or that was good or that was, it was always big criticism. That's how he was, because basically he was bloody good. So everybody, I suppose, looked way inferior to him.
He was just particularly determined, and once he'd made his mind up, nothing was going to stop him. And that very much went through to the mechanics in the team, people like Eddie Dennis, and listening to some of the things they got up to.
If you question him, you have to be pretty sure of your ground. If you want to prove a point, it wouldn't do to try and bullshit him, because he'd soon find you out. And so it's you have to be sure of yourself.
Basically, mad. But as they say, knife edge. You know, between being mad and a genius. They all say it's a knife edge, and he was like that.
His emblem was throwing his hat in the air as the cars crossed the line in victory, and every time that happened was his most special moment.
Chapman was the first team owner to get serious sponsorship onto an F1 car, the JPS Lotus.
They were the first to do it really well, and there's a lot of people, you look at the modern Grand Prix cars, frankly are a bit of a mess. The JPS colour scheme is fantastic. The only slight disappointment is they can't pay us any money, because if they did, we'd have to take the John Player off.
So how did the drivers get on with their demanding boss?
Jimmy and Mario had a particular technical understanding which he appreciated. Emerson was someone who could win a lot of races without necessarily hurting the car.
Perhaps the best and closest one was with Ronnie Peterson, who I think was just the greatest race driver that anyone could possibly hope to have sitting in their car, because he only knew one way to drive a race car, which was flat out.
The thing that distinguishes, I think, all racing drivers from normal people, or all top racing drivers, is their enormous self-belief and competitiveness. Very, very dangerous. I don't know if you've ever shaken hands with Nigel Mansell. That's a competitive situation. Very dangerous thing to do. I very much liked Elio De Angelis. He was a real gentleman. He had style. He was Italian. He won a Grand Prix, that fantastic Grand Prix in Austria, where he beat Keke Rosberg by 0.05 of a second or something.
That was the last Lotus win that Colin Chapman was to see before his death. The Chapman legacy lives on with his son Clive and Classic Team Lotus.
We set up Classic Team Lotus about 10 years ago, initially to look after our own collection of cars, but also we felt we should offer the service on a commercial basis to other owners. And at about the same time, historic motorsport really started to boom in a big way. And I think people particularly appreciated being able to have their car looked after by effectively a works team, and especially by the original mechanics, the people who used to look after the car for Mario Andretti or Nigel Mansell. They're looking after the car for them. Certainly when we restore the cars, I get the feeling now that sometimes we wheel them out the shop in better condition than they ever were, because we're able to give the time and attention to detail which they just weren't allowed to do originally because they were going Grand Prix racing. Whereas now the schedule isn't quite so hectic, and we are able to present them to a terrific standard, which I think he would have appreciated. Okay, so this is Dan Collins' car, who started racing in Thoroughbred Grand Prix this season, and he's done very well.
As a young schoolboy, I can remember watching Jim Clark, and Jim Clark was the best driver in my books, and Lotus was the best car out there. And I dreamt one day that perhaps I would drive a Formula One Lotus. And not many people make it into the real F1 world, and I got the opportunity to do this, so I thought, well, I've got to give it a go and see if I can do the job. Mansell drove it in qualifying, but it never actually raced, I don't believe, when it was originally built. But Lotus being Lotus, they tried to make use of whatever they had in later years, and it ran as both Type 92, the year after this one, and then later on with a Renault turbo engine in the back as a Type 94. So it's had a bit of an interesting history.
This was the first carbon tub made in-house by a Formula One team. It came out the same season as the McLaren, so there was a little bit of argument about who was first. It was 3 times the strength, about half the weight of the aluminium tub, and is what all Formula One cars are made of these days.
You just cannot describe the acceleration of these things. Nothing really prepares you for it. So when you go out there and there are other people who are still a lot quicker than you and you think you're going as fast as you can, it's a bit daunting.
Another Lotus running in the TGP is the Type 77 of Junro Nishida.
This is the Lotus 77, which after 2 seasons of not winning a Grand Prix, got Lotus back into the winner's circle, which is where they should be. And Mario Andretti won the 1976 Japanese Grand Prix in this car.
The car was just really terrible at the beginning, but we got it just enough so it would be competitive enough to get us going, you know, at the end of the 76 season. And actually, we wound up with a win in Japan, so nothing better than winning the last race of the season.
He subsequently nominated it as his greatest ever drive, much to the delight of Junro Nishida, who drives this car now in Thoroughbred Grand Prix. He watched the car as a lad winning the Japanese Grand Prix. Now he's a successful businessman in Japan, and he comes over 6 times a year to race the car.
Another quick runner in Class C is the Lotus Type 81, driven by Hubertus Bolson.
It's a beautiful car. I mean, every time we take the cover away, you look how they constructed and built it. I mean, those guys got money, they got intelligence and good engineering those days. And the handling is fine. The car is very well balanced. You don't have to do a lot to improve the car. You take it, you go out, and it's already good time, and you just do a little bit. I mean, it's nothing dramatic on the negative side. It's a beautiful car.
Chapman was the master of regulation reading. Was he breaking the rules with the Type 88?
Dad was never really one to respect the rules, and he was always working out how to go quicker than the next man. Most of the time it worked, sometimes it didn't work, and occasionally the politicians decided that he'd gone too far, hence the Type 88.
We took it to 3 races, and 4 races, and never allowed to race it. So the car never raced, it never got developed, and never knew whether the ideas would have worked, and it was probably among the most revolutionary ideas. It had 2 chassis, effectively.
It really was Chapman at his best as regards the design for the car and everything. It never did qualify that high years ago, but the other teams perceived it as a car that might be too good, and it never actually ran in a race. I was the first one to ever drive the car in a race.
There was this sort of totally museum white elephant of a car up and running again and working.
One Lotus that wasn't a white elephant was the 79. Recently, Mario Andretti had a chance to get close to his old car for one more blast.
I did a test for a magazine, a US magazine, just not too long ago in the Lotus 79 at Watkins Glen. And it was quite fun. The car was really well prepared. In fact, one of the mechanics on the car had been with Lotus. So he still had the worksheet from Colin Chapman's handwriting. And we set up the car fairly close, you know, and of course tires were not the same, and couldn't have the skirts, but it was fun. And we were like within 2 seconds of the record that I had set there when I qualified, you know, with this very hard Avon tire. So I was sliding, pitching the car around, and I think I was in my old glory.
Talking about old glory, can we look forward to Lotus returning to modern Formula One racing again?
I think there's a future for Lotus in terms of its history, but as to going Grand Prix racing again, it's not something that I'm going to do. And although it sounds a little selfish, I suppose my family would almost prefer that my father's achievements stand alone, although we do realise there's a lot of enthusiasts out there who would like nothing more than to see the Lotus marque back on the grid, and I guess we'd probably get over any disappointment and be cheering them on like everybody else.
Well, I might as well bring all the old boys out there. I don't care. Maybe Nicky Lauda should come out of retirement. And,
a negative lift. In other words, the air passing under the car helps to hold it on the road. Holds the car down, it improves the grip of the tyres on the road, improves the stability of the car, and improves the safety of the car.
Colin Chapman issues in the era of ground effect, but who was responsible for the idea?
The technology for producing downforce has been around for years. In my book, there's a picture of a car with a wing mounted above it from 1904, 1905. So the concept of mounting a wing on a car, in that particular situation, it was to create lift, but it wouldn't have taken a leap of imagination to realize if you turn the wing upside down, it would push it down. What didn't happen for the next 60 years was nobody realized it would make a car go faster round a circuit. That discovery, which was in about very early 60s, and was taken up by Formula One very quickly and led to ground effect, was by far the biggest technical revolution of that period.
It was Lotus that went on to suck it and see. Colin Chapman had started a revolution.
And he said, right, Peter, you can run the wind tunnel program. And in your spare time, he said, which, you know, out of the 18-hour day, there wasn't a lot of it.
I was chief engineer there, so basically I just oversaw the project and attempted to guide them all in the right direction, which was quite difficult because we had a lot of very independent engineers there, you could say.
I'd been still toying with this whole thing. There must be a way of generating forces with the whole car. And we ended up with wing-shaped pods. And one day the wind tunnel started producing very inconsistent results. We couldn't get it to produce the same figures all the time. And I noticed that the side pods were sagging, but as they sagged down, the downforce increased. So it didn't take a great mental leap to say, well, it must be something to do with the position of the side pods. Maybe it's the gap along the edge. Why don't we seal the gap with a piece of card?
As soon as the skirts were fitted to the car, there's a dramatic difference, like 100% increase in downforce, so that everyone realised that this is something special here.
So we redid the test about 3 times before we believed it. And then I think we retired to the bar to think what on earth we were going to do with it.
Other people tried to take the credit when actually it was him.
I don't really claim to have invented ground effect. I was in the right place at the right time to exploit it, doing the right sort of wind tunnel testing, working with the right designer, stimulated by the right manager, Tony Rudd, and with the right person, Colin Chapman, to grab it and say, right, I'm running off with this, off we go. And I always believed that Colin Chapman should get the main credit because he took the real risk.
It was exciting times, even that, because I loved that. I loved that side of it, you know, to be able to have just breakthroughs in those areas. I mean, that's really part of what kept me motivated, too, you know, all the years. You know, to just always look forward to that better mousetrap.
Lotus had the best mousetrap and Brabham had a problem. Unlike every other team, they couldn't just copy the 79. Enter the BT46B.
Gordon and Bernie, between them, were absolutely brilliant at taking the rules to the absolute limit.
The fan car, the BT46B, was born out of necessity, really, because at that time we were using Alfa Romeo Grand Prix engines, a boxer, a horizontally opposed engine, a flat engine, so it was very wide. Further to that, Chapman invented ground effect, or discovered ground effect, and that required these side venturis on the car, and right where you needed the space, we had a flat 12 engine. I said to Bernie, we're dead in the water, because we've got a wide engine. We cannot have Venturis down the side of the car. And by the end of the year, everybody will have ground effect and we're going to be left behind. How else can we make downforce equivalent to the Lotus with a wide engine? And fortunately for us, there was a loophole in the aerodynamic regulations. The idea was stick a fan on the car to cool the car, make sure that 55% of the fan's energy was cooling the car, 45% went to sucking it down into the ground.
Gordon was incredibly intelligent and had this mind that could think in a way which put his car with some bits on it that no one else had thought of, but by God, if you don't have them on your car by next week, you're going to be nowhere.
Chapman came on the phone, I was at home, he was in Sweden for the Swedish Grand Prix, and he said, Peter, we're in terrible trouble, because Brabham had just produced the fan car, and they sandbagged the first day of practice and things, but when it came to qualifying, they actually unleashed the performance of the car.
I had no idea it would be so fast. I mean, it was embarrassingly fast. Bernie even made the guys qualify on full tanks for the Swedish Grand Prix to try and slow them down. I think Nicky still qualified on the front row.
You know, we're in deep trouble. They produced a car that can beat the 79 and could take a championship off us. And we started, he said, right, you know, we've got to work out how to do a fan car. At the same time, we've got to try and get it banned.
He had the championship in the bag, and you could see this car just disappearing into the night and taking his championship away. So he got Andretti to go around to the other drivers, try and lobby people and say, oh, it's really dangerous. You know, I've been behind a car and it throws stones at the, you know, it's such a high speed blast of air out the back. It picks up everything and throws it out the back. And in actual fact, there's no way it could throw stones because the fan efflux was only 55 miles an hour. And anything heavier than a grain of sand that hit the fan got shot out sideways and not backwards because of the centrifugal force.
I mean, is it just a case of the interpretation of the regulations? You know, Gordon thought he'd built a car which complied with the regulations, and probably did. And as soon as it's competitive, people think it doesn't comply with the regulations.
It was right at the time where Bernie was trying to build up Formula One, and the Formula One Constructors Association was quite new, and the other constructors put a lot of pressure on Bernie not to race the car. The car was never banned according to the rules. We could have raced it. If it hadn't been for the constructors' problem, we could have raced the fan car for the rest of that year and won the championship. I mean, easily. We could have. I mean, when Lauda passed Andretti in the Lotus, he passed them around the outside. It was embarrassingly quick.
I think it's a fantastic car, the one that Gordon did. I think it was illegal, but you know, that's where we differ.
There is so much misinformation about the fan car. I'm going to write a book on it one day, I think.